side. So it would be
for a moment we had a problem.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone, to the last of our most interesting series on the feminine genius of the church. We'll start with our opening prayer first. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Almighty Father and Creator, we bless you and praise you. You created us in your image, male and female. Man and woman, you created us. You gave us dominion over creation that we may worship you by tending to your creation. You designated for each of us a role in your creation so that you may be glorified. We thank you for this particular time that you have given us so that we may learn and understand the role of woman. Beginning with your most blessed and perfect creation, the Virgin Mary who bore your Son, who in turn gifted her to humanity to be our mother. In her footsteps, many holy and courageous women followed our Mama Mary. From the women doctors of the church who contributed to our enlightenment, that we may grow to understand and love you more, to the generations of brave young women martyrs, to the many women who are religious sisters, mothers, physicians, workers, who show us how we can live our love for you in the ordinariness of our lives. Give us the wisdom to learn from these women over the next few weeks, that we too may love you and serve you through the care of all creation as you intended us to do. We ask this through your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, in union with the Holy Spirit. Amen. So once again, good evening, everyone, and welcome back to our series. Tonight, we are most honored to have Martin be our last presenter. Now, many of you probably know Marty if you've been with the parish for a while, or even a long time, since she's been there with her husband for 33 years. I knew her best from the migrant ministry, which she has been a part of for the longest time, but probably more recently when she transitioned to doing the Oaxaca ministries, where every year she comes up to ask us to support the children and the students of Oaxaca. But that's not all she does. She's very busy. She's on the pro-life team. She teaches RCIA, and now she's also working with the adult for faith formation. So with that, let's welcome Marty as she shares with us her own insights into the genius, the feminine genius of the church. Marty.
Thank you. Trying to get my next slide up. Okay, let's see. Seems like, okay, now we've got it. Sorry, little delay there. Good evening. I want to thank you guys all for joining us tonight. It is my pleasure to be here for our final session. It's a kaleidoscope of holy women. So I'd like to start by asking you to imagine bits of colored glass or really any random object, maybe paper clips or buttons. So mirrors are going to fragment the objects and combine them into interesting and beautiful visuals. So let's imagine a kaleidoscope. And in it, God takes what is beautiful and what is ordinary. He composes a person with attributes that include personality, physical and mental gifts. He throws in some challenges and some imperfections. He sets this person in a particular place and time. And then he makes abundant graces available for her, and he hopes with all his heart that she'll take full advantage of them. God rotates the barrel, and all the beauty inside shifts and refracts to create an individual who has the potential to leave an imprint on the world that is extraordinary. The brightness of her yes to God stands out, and either immediately or in the course of time, she may be recognized as a saint. This evening, we're going to focus on 6 individuals who share the trait God gave them of femininity. Women who made a gift of themselves to others, who put their hands in the hands of God and followed him to their destiny. On August 7th, 1942, a train pulled out of an assembly camp in Westerbork, which is a town in the eastern part of the Netherlands. On it were prisoners of the Third Reich. These were Jews who had converted to Catholicism. They had been rounded up in retaliation for a pastoral letter that had been read a couple of weeks before at every parish and at every mass in the Netherlands. This bishop's letter informed the Dutch Catholics that a protest had been registered by officials in the Nazi occupation, demanding that their actions against Jewish citizens stop. Edith Stein, known then as Sister Teresa Benedicta of the Cross, she and her sister Rosa were on that train. We know that the train arrived on August 9th, 2 days later, at Auschwitz. And we know that there was no indication that Edith and her sister were checked into the camp. So we are pretty well certain that she and Rosa were gassed the morning they arrived at Auschwitz. Edith was born on Yom Kippur. That's the Day of Atonement, the most holy day in the Jewish calendar. She was the youngest of 11 children, born into a Jewish family in Breslau, Silesia, which is now Wrocław, Poland. Her father died when she was 2. Her mother took over the family lumber business, which was kind of unusual at that time, and she worked really hard and made a success of it. Her mom loved the Jewish faith and traditions, and she tried to pass them down to her children. But as a teen, Edith chose to renounce all belief. She maintained an ethical idealism, believing that her role in the world would be to serve humanity. Edith had extraordinary intellectual gifts. In 1911, only 3 years after women were admitted to academic education in Prussia, she began at the University of Breslau. Her academic career introduced her to philosophical ideas that were taking root in Europe at that time. She studied under Edmund Husserl, the father of phenomenology. This is the school of philosophy that makes the connection between the visible world and the world of ideas and values. It contends that a person considering external realities will be led to abstract truths. This branch of philosophy stands against modern and postmodern thought that conceives of the mind as generating truth through its own efforts. The mind is not receptive, but creative. It invents itself and constructs its truth. The phenomenology that Edith was drawn to allows for the existence of God, whereas postmodern thought results in what we see in our day, the idea of your truth and my truth, the idea of all gender bathrooms. Edith was a truth seeker, and one evening she found it. During the summer of 1921, she was staying with friends, and she pulled a book off the shelf and experienced a swift conversion. The book was the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila. When she finished it, Edith's response was, "This is the truth." On January 1st, 1922, at the age of 30, she was baptized into the Catholic Church. In spite of her PhD and all of her academic achievements, she was not allowed to apply for a professorship because she was a woman. She wanted very much to enter the Carmelite convent, but she put that off because her relationship with her mother was so strained after her conversion to Catholicism. She worked as a lecturer and a teacher. And finally, in 1932, she got a professorship at a Catholic university, but she was only able to work for 2 semesters before anti-Semitic laws revoked the rights of ethnic Jews to work. This is when she entered the convent in Cologne, Germany. She continued to write incredible philosophical works. Her work on personalism was picked up later in the century by Karol Wojtyła, Mother Teresa, and Dorothy Day. Edith thought a lot about the differences between men and women. The receptivity of a woman's body reveals a spiritual openness to the human person, whereas a man's nature is more oriented to action and work and objective accomplishments. When Pope St. John Paul II wrote Mulieris Dignitatem, that we heard about in Diana's talk, the first in our series, Pope John Paul was referring to and incorporating Edith's ideas. The concept that the world needs a complementary presence of women in the workplace comes from her. But women should work as women, not abandoning their femininity in order to try to be men. She deepened her prayer life. She achieved a level of mystical union with Christ that enabled her to see the hell that was taking shape as the German Third Reich gained force. She understood the trajectory it was taking. But she actually came to welcome the part that she thought she would be playing in it. She would offer her life in atonement for the sin of her oppressors. She would stand proud and tall for her people. When the Nazis were just getting started, Edith had sent a letter to Pope Pius XI begging him to issue an encyclical in defense of the Jews. As Hitler closed his grip on Germany, Sister Teresa Benedicta of the Cross left Cologne for Echt in the Netherlands. Her sister Rosa converted to Catholicism and followed her there. The 2 of them sought haven in Switzerland, but they could find only one placement, and Sister Teresa Benedicta would not leave her sister behind. On August 2nd, 1942, when Edith had just read the meditation that began the period of evening prayer at the convent, there was a loud pounding at the door. As the Gestapo took them away, Sister Teresa Benedicta said to Rosa, "Come, let us go for our people." So with another twist of the kaleidoscope, we come to St. Gianna Beretta Molla. Gianna Molla, on the surface, it looks as though hers is the completely ordinary story of a completely ordinary woman who made one extraordinary choice. Gianna Beretta Molla was born in 1922, the year Edith converted to Catholicism. She was one of 13 children in a happy, comfortably situated Catholic family close to Milan, Italy. Although they were fairly affluent, her parents taught the children to live simply and to translate their frugality into care for the poor. Gianna grew up going to daily mass, volunteering with ministries in her parish, and persisting with her schoolwork. She was actually not a very good student when she was a child, but she worked really hard and she maintained and got a degree in medicine with a specialty in pediatrics. During her 20s, she focused on her education and her medical practice, and she also volunteered with Catholic Action, which was an organization that worked to deepen the faith of young people, teenagers. So she worked with the female teenagers. She thought she might have a vocation to be a medical missionary because she had a brother who was a doctor and a priest in Brazil, and a sister who was a nun and a doctor in India. But with the help of her spiritual director, Gianna discerned that her health would be a limiting factor, and so she began to think of marriage as her vocation. In the fall of 1954, Gianna began dating Pietro Mola, a plant engineer at a local factory. On New Year's Eve, 1954, they went to a ballet at La Scala in Milan, and then to drink a toast to the new year with Gianna's family. This was Pietro's diary entry. This evening may be a decisive date for my life and aspirations. I entrust myself to Our Lady of Good Counsel. They shared a deep level of faith and the same dreams for a family. They were married on September 24th, 1955. They were blessed with babies. Pierluigi in 1956, Mariolina in 1957, and Lauretta in 1959. Gianna had a nanny, so that allowed her to work in the afternoons. She raised her children in the same happy, faith-filled environment that she had grown up in. The family was fairly well off, and they vacationed in the mountains during the summer, did a little bit of skiing in the wintertime, and occasionally Gianna would join her husband on a business trip and get to see a little bit of Europe with him. At the end of the summer in 1961, Gianna realized that she was expecting again. But 2 months into her pregnancy, she began to experience abdominal pain. It turned out there was a fibrous benign tumor growing on her uterus. Her choices were to abort the baby and have the tumor removed, to have a hysterectomy, or to have the tumor removed and continue the pregnancy. The safe choice for her would have been the abortion or the hysterectomy. Continuing the pregnancy after surgery would be dangerous because the sutures could come undone later in the pregnancy and it would cause the uterus to rupture, and that might cause the death of both the baby and the mom. As a doctor, she knew the risk, but she chose the option that gave her baby a chance. From the time of the initial surgery to the time she delivered her little girl, she directed her doctors and her husband to give preference to the life of the child over her own. She wanted so badly to live and to raise her 4 children, but she put herself in the hands of God. The baby, Gianna Emanuela, was born on April 21st, 1962. In spite of every effort by her doctors, Gianna died of septic peritonitis a week later on the 28th. Gianna Beretta Mola was known for that one decision that she made in favor of her child, but her whole life led her to that decision. She wanted to please God in everything, to always do his will. Her sister said she wanted to do everyday things well, even the most insignificant ones. Gianna herself wrote to Pietro before their marriage, "I want our family to be a true cenacle where Jesus will reign and be at home to guide and direct our every step, to illuminate each one of our decisions, each one of our actions." In a world where abortion on demand is the norm, Gianna shows us a different way. From her youth, she made it a practice to abandon her life to God's will. She made a gift of herself to her husband and children and became an example for us and an icon of the pro-life movement. So with another twist of the kaleidoscope, we see Dr. Anita Figueiredo. The ladder of holiness in the Catholic Church starts out with servant of God, then venerable, then blessed, then saint. But those labels do not really determine holiness. They are just the official recognition of holiness. So here's a woman who does not, as yet, bear any of those titles. Here is a woman you may never have heard of. Like Gianna Molla, she was a doctor and a mom. Anita Figueiredo was born in Costa Rica. Her parents separated when she was a year old, and her mother brought her to the United States when she was 5. The story is that even at that young age, Anita wanted to be a doctor, and there were no medical schools in Costa Rica at that time. Her family was from a cultured class, but Anita and her mom lived the lives of poor immigrants in New York City. Her mother was a seamstress in a garment industry sweatshop. There must have been a spark about this little girl, because with her bright mind and her sweet, energetic character, she was awarded scholarships at Catholic boarding schools for elementary, and she got a scholarship at a Methodist boarding school for high school that was in Virginia. One of the turning points in Anita's young life was her entrance interview for Barnard when she was just getting into college. Barnard is an Ivy League college in New York City. So at 15 years old, less than 10 years after arriving in the United States, Anita had won a full scholarship. When the admissions officer made a disparaging remark about her high school, Anita jumped out of her chair. She stood up tall, all 5 feet of her, and she said if they were going to insult her school, they could keep their scholarship. And she walked out. With only days before the fall term was starting, Anita stumbled onto Manhattanville College, where the Sisters of the Sacred Heart also offered her a full scholarship and put together a pre-med program just to suit her ambitions. Anita would have qualified as spiritual but not religious at the beginning of her college career, but after debating her religious education professors at Manhattanville, she became an intellectual convert to Catholicism and received confirmation her junior year. I kind of wonder whether that would have happened at Barnard. She achieved her dream of being a doctor, graduated from the Long Island College of Medicine, and married a fellow student, Bill Doyle, right before he left for service in the Navy in the Pacific Theater. It was unusual for a woman to be a doctor in the 40s. Like Rosie the Riveter, it helped that so many men were fighting in the war. In 1942, Dr. Figueiredo was profiled in Look magazine. Bill visited San Diego on leave in 1947. Oh, no, he visited on leave during his Navy career, but in 47, he and Anita brought their family to La Jolla. They had 2 children at that point. So they opened their medical practices. They had 7 more children. And Anita became involved in church and civic projects, both local and global. Dr. Anita had a drive and a personality that just loved being productive. She engaged in no leisure activities. She didn't entertain or socialize. One frustrated friend said, "The trouble with you, Anita, is you are only a friend in need." She did have complete control over her schedule. Every day she had lunch with her husband, and every evening at 6 o'clock, she had dinner with the whole family. And she made it a priority to build her schedule around the children's special activities. These are some of the projects she was involved in and the awards she received. With her special connection to the Sisters of the Sacred Heart at Manhattanville College, she helped Reverend Mother Rosalie Hill get USC started. In 1954, as Bill and Anita celebrated their 12th anniversary, Anita was awarded the highest honor available to women in the Catholic Church, the Holy Cross Pro Ecclesiae et Pontifice, one of so many awards and recognitions that she would receive in her lifetime. The reason I wanted to look into her life is because she founded the charity Friends of the Poor, and this is the 501c3 that an organization I work with is connected to. I had heard about her being the first female surgeon in San Diego County, about her 9 kids and her love for the poor. So I wanted to find out how she managed to do all that and why. In 1958, Anita happened to see the first magazine article published in the United States about Mother Teresa. She was so taken with the story that she sent not only a check, but a letter. And Mother Teresa answered her letter, and this began a friendship that lasted until the saint died. It was at Anita's suggestion that Mother Teresa chose Tijuana as the headquarters for her Missionaries of Charity Fathers. At the Beatification Mass for Mother Teresa, Anita was one of 10 people selected to sit in the front row and to receive the Eucharist from the hands of Pope St. John Paul II. Anita did not face the drama of a choice like Gianna's, but she knew about suffering. 3 of her children predeceased her. Still, she had a positive attitude about life, and what she did on her own terms. In the fall of '52, when she was 8 months pregnant with her 7th child, she was the keynote speaker for a conference of business and professional women. The title of her speech was "The Complete Woman in Modern Society." Edith Stein would have appreciated the theme of her talk. It's time women stopped trying to be men. Dr. Anita Figueiredo, daily mass goer, dynamo, doctor, mother, and friend to the poor. So our kaleidoscope is spinning again, and we are going to meet servant of God, Dorothy Day. We can talk about Dorothy Day before and after. Dorothy Day before was a young idealist involved in radical causes in New York City. Her compatriots were communists, atheists, anarchists, pacifists, and suffragettes. She joined the Socialist Party and the Wobblies, which is a union with socialist and anarchist ties. She had a hard time kind of integrating all these disparate influences. For example, she was jailed in a protest for women's suffrage, but after the movement was successful, she didn't register to vote because she was also an anarchist and voting would be cooperation with the state. There were 2 avenues of grace in her life that separate before from after. In 1926, she gave birth to a daughter. She had had an abortion in an earlier relationship, and she thought she wouldn't be able to bear children. So when she conceived, she was so happy and she was open to the grace of God. Her common law husband didn't mind the child, but when she wanted to have her daughter baptized Catholic, he could not really handle that, and so they ended up parting ways. Choosing faith cost her the man that she loved, so why did she want her daughter baptized? She didn't want her daughter making the same mistake she'd made. And why Catholic? Well, of course, she could see that there was one true church that came down from Peter, but more important to her was the fact that this church claimed the allegiance of the masses of the poor. She had been raised Episcopalian, and she saw that religion as just a little bit too bourgeois for her. Dorothy herself was baptized in 1927. Her connections with the more radical elements she'd been close to withered. She wandered, supporting herself with journalism. In December of 1932, she was living in New York, but she left her daughter with her sister and her brother-in-law, and she went to DC to cover a communist demonstration for a couple of liberal Catholic magazines. And after the demonstration, on December 8th, at the Shrine of the Immaculate Conception, she prayed that she would find a way to combine her Catholic faith with her passion for social justice. When she returned to New York, In her apartment, Peter Moran was waiting to meet her. Peter Moran, he was a French peasant, self-educated in philosophy and theology. He was Dorothy's second avenue of grace. Through him, she found her vocation. He introduced her to the papal encyclicals Rerum Novarum and Quadragesimo Anno, which address a Catholic vision of justice for the worker and care for the poor. At his prodding, she started the Catholic Worker newspaper, and she began opening houses of hospitality. The Catholic Worker newspaper was launched at Union Square in New York City on May Day, 1933, in the depths of the Great Depression. Dorothy founded the newspaper to present the church's social teaching and to counter the influence of communism, fascism, and other statist doctrines. This quote illustrates who they were writing for and why. For those who are sitting on the park benches in the warm spring sunlight, for those who are huddling in shelters trying to escape the rain, for those who are walking the street in the all but futile search to find work, for those who think there is no hope for the future, no recognition of their plight, this little paper is addressed. It is printed to call their attention to the fact that the Catholic Church has a social program, to let them know that there are men of God who are working not only for their spiritual, but for their material welfare. Circulation reached 150,000 at its height, and it's currently at about 90,000. Houses of hospitality were opened one after another to unite those in need with volunteers who would serve them, living in a community of love. They were a rejection of the bureaucratic principle of government assistance. Instead of saying, I can give you a voucher, Dorothy would say, come home with me and I'll share what I have. The goal of the Catholic Worker movement was to replace the political paradigm with influence by example, proletarian education, publication, and direct action. Okay, so they had not only houses of hospitality in urban areas, but they had farming communes out in the country. And one time Peter was out at one of these communes and he knew they needed to build a road. So he could have organized a committee to build the road, or he could have just asked the people that were living in the home to come out and build the road with him. But no, instead, he just went outside and started breaking rocks. So this is influence by example, the idea that people are going to know you're working for the common good and they are going to want to jump in and help you. The proletarian education, this would be individuals sharing ideas with the workers, and then the workers actually training the intellectuals in whatever it was their skill. It might be carpentry, it might be mechanics, whatever. So Peter actually started organized evenings called clarification of thought. And these were kind of classes for the poor people that lived in these houses, teaching them about the dignity of the human person, about the dignity of work, and even about the dignity of poverty. So he's basically explicating for them these papal encyclicals. And the publication, of course, was the Catholic Worker newspaper. It was one of the most influential of anarchist papers, even though anarchism is an atheist movement, and this paper was overtly and strongly Catholic. Direct action would be strikes, demonstrations, and boycotts. Dorothy worked with Cesar Chavez, for example, in California on the Great Boycotts. And direct action would also include works of mercy. So opening a house of hospitality, this is what they would consider direct action. The foundational principles for the Catholic Worker movement were pacifism, distributism, personalism, and anarchy. So let's start with pacifism. Imagine that Dorothy's socialist identification with the masses kind of collides with our idea of the mystical body of Christ. And you can see now that you're in solidarity with all persons created in the image of God, even your enemy. Dorothy was imprisoned 7 times for nonviolent civil disobedience, and most of those times had to do with protesting nuclear weapons. Distributism. This is based on the encyclicals. And the idea is that God gave the earth for the use and enjoyment of the whole human race. Private property is a good thing, but property should be widely owned, not concentrated in the hands of a few. Dorothy would like the idea of small business, small farms, small communities. Part of this idea is the concept that it's the family, not the individual, that is the primary social unit. So families provide a buffer between the individual and the state. And the distributism incorporates the ideas of subsidiarity and solidarity. And subsidiarity is basically an argument for local government. So the idea that you never want to have a function of government go up to a level that could be more, resolved by a lower level. So you want to keep government local if it's possible. And then solidarity is basically care for the common good. Edith Stein, John Paul II, and Mother Teresa were also personalists. So personalism, a big part of the Catholic worker movement. Each person is a free spiritual and moral agent. No person can be treated as a means to an end. Another idea is that every human life has significance beyond itself, and every person can meaningfully participate in and have an impact on history. So we take our own little piece of history and we infuse it with our self-emptying love. And this is the means of our salvation, but it's also our participation in the salvation of the cosmos. Pretty deep stuff. So a personalist is a doer of the word, not a hearer only. And my favorite is anarchism, because when I hear that, I think about Portland and Seattle and buildings burning. What could be good about that? But here are the ideas behind the Catholic worker style anarchism. First of all, human freedom is the greatest good. They are opposed to any institutionalized coercive relationship, for example, the state, which imposes social cohesion and direction from above. The state employs compulsion to protect the power of the few and enforces compliance. So it's basically in the business of exploiting the many. Anarchism advocates spontaneous, fluid social relationships. So social structures are kept to a minimum and they're dismantled when they're no longer useful. They are never to be institutionalized, supplanting personal choice. So an example would be Peter Moran building that road. If he had wanted to build like a little committee to have a committee to do the road, that would be fine. But as soon as the road is done, you take the committee apart because you don't want like a standing office of road building or maintenance for the house or anything like that. You want to address problems as they come up and not have these bureaucratic structures. So finally, an anarchist would see coercive systems as infantilizing people. This is the nanny state, basically. Anarchy, in contrast, fosters responsibility and initiative. So Dorothy, incidentally, she didn't particularly care for the label anarchist. She preferred personal communitarian, okay? But there were a lot of anarchists in the movement that followed these type of thoughts. It wasn't really an official position of the Catholic worker movement, but Dorothy really appreciated the church's teachings on sexual morality. I'm going to let you read this quote. She thanked God for Pope Paul VI and his encyclical Humanae Vitae, even though it did seem like the whole Catholic world, if not the whole world, was against him. Like Mother Teresa and Dr. Anita, Dorothy saw Jesus in the face of the poor. She didn't want to start an organization with a business plan, with budgets, with an annual report. She just reached out and cared for people. She lived Matthew 25. Whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did it to me. She ends her autobiography, The Long Loneliness, with, the only solution is love, and love comes with community. Our kaleidoscope is spinning again, and we meet Mother Angelica. This is what Paul Darrow saw when he was flipping through TV channels late in 2001. He called his boyfriend into the room and they had a great time laughing at the pirate nun and Christianity in general. When Jeff went back to whatever it was he was doing, and Paul was about to change the station, he heard Mother Angelica say this: "You see, God created you and I to be happy in this life and the next. He cares for you. He watches your every move. There's no one that loves you can do that." Paul's life changed from that moment. He began sneaking peeks at EWTN Live, Mother Angelica Live on EWTN, and he ended up coming back to the Catholic Church and working with an organization called Courage, which is an apostolate for people who experience same-sex attraction. Mother Mary Angelica of the Annunciation was born in 1923. She lived in a poor neighborhood in Canton, Ohio. It was a mix of Black and Italian. Rita's father abandoned the two of them when she was 5, and her mother, May, was in such a fragile emotional state that Rita ended up spending her childhood basically taking care of her. So when Rita was 18, she developed a thing called ptosis of the stomach. So it was a painful condition that caused stomach spasms and an inability to digest food. Rita was suffering so much and her mother didn't really know what to do. She took her to the doctor and the doctors had things that they tried, but they didn't seem to help. So her mother took her to a mystic in Canton. This lady's name was Rhoda Wise. She lived in a little shack over on like the really wrong side of the tracks. It was called a depression shack. And Rhoda was what was known as a victim soul. And she was a stigmatic, actually. So May took Rita over there to visit one evening when they had just run out of options. And Rhoda had Rita sit in the chair where Jesus and Saint Therese of Lisieux would sit when Rhoda was having her visions. So Rita just sat there and May and Rhoda talked, and a half an hour later, they were sent on their way with a holy card. And it turned out it was a novena to Saint Therese of Lisieux. So they went home and they prayed the novena. And it seemed like nothing really happened. You know, the 9th day, they finished the prayers. Rita was still hurting. She went to bed. And then she experienced a pain that was worse than anything she'd ever felt before, but it was a different kind of pain. She also heard a voice telling her not to put on the contraption that she'd been wearing that was supposed to help her with this problem. The voice just said, "Get up and walk." So she got out of bed, she walked, and she discovered that she'd been healed. All she wanted to do after her healing was give herself to Jesus. She enlisted the help of a spiritual director, and she entered an order of contemplative nuns in Cleveland when she was 21. She chafed under the harsh environment of the pre-Vatican II cloister. She struggled with anger, impatience, and a scorching tongue. She was disciplined by the superiors, but her hard-knocked childhood had steeled her to the abuse, and she managed to make it through. She held firm in her vocation, and she did make it through her novitiate. Incidentally, after Vatican II, Mother Angelica participated in the reform of religious life, and in place of the rigid hierarchy and the unbendable rules and the severe atmosphere of those cloisters, she anticipated monasteries where formalism and regimentation would be washed away. Having never experienced the warmth of a family, she would cultivate a family atmosphere in the orders that she founded, where the women would be joined in a deep communal union with God. What is supremely ironic is the fact that Rita's mother, having grown into a deep faith, actually joined the convent. So she joined the same convent where Mother Angelica now was, living. And when Angelica became an abbess, she said, "I'm my own grandmother." After almost 9 years, she made her final profession in January of 1953. So about this time, she suffered a fall cleaning a floor with a commercial scrubber, and the untreated injury would be the cause of chronic pain for the rest of her life. In 1956, she had to go to the hospital, and it was supposed to be a spinal fusion. And her doctor told her there was a 50% chance that she would never walk again. So Angelica had a little talk with Jesus. She made a promise to God that if she came out of the surgery with the use of her legs, she would found a new monastery. And in fact, she founded 2. She founded monasteries in Irondale, Alabama, and later in Hanceville. When she and her little band of nuns went to Irondale, their plan was to live lives of deep contemplation in reparation for the sin of slavery and racism. But God had other plans. In order to fund the operation, Angelica was giving talks and doing Bible studies, and these became so popular that the whole direction of her ministry changed. She founded the Eternal Word Television Network, a media conglomerate that currently consists of 11 TV channels broadcast to 300 million households, AM/FM satellite radio, shortwave radio, the largest Catholic website in the US, electronic and print news services, and a publishing arm. It was amazing that Mother Angelica, who was a high school graduate with a couple of years of working for an advertising agency as a secretary, it was amazing she could accomplish this. But what was really amazing was how she did it. She had a simple faith that kept her close to Jesus. She often experienced intuitions, visions, and locutions, and she acted on them. A few days before installing the satellite dish, one of her nuns had a vision in prayer of the dish before a darkened sky with a red flame shooting from its center. This is the photo of that first dish being installed, complete with the red flame. Mother and her nuns had complete trust in God's providence, whether building her monasteries or the media empire. The cycle was always the same. She would have an inspiration and she'd act on it. At every juncture, the choice would be to do what makes sense, to back away, to play it safe, or to go for it, not knowing where the money would come from. She and her nuns always chose go for it, and the money always materialized. Mother never had a budget or a business plan, whether it was selling fishing lures that she and the nuns made, or roast peanuts, or 45 RPM recordings of her heart-to-heart talks, or moving from one satellite to the next one that put her into more homes around the world, she would abandon the project to Jesus and just keep moving forward. Just as she gathered satellite contracts and radio affiliates, she also gathered physical ailments. Nerve damage in her legs, asthma, diabetes, an enlarged heart, and in later years, a series of strokes. She embraced all of it as providential mystery, reminders of her total dependence on God. These were opportunities to engage in redemptive suffering. At one point, she was wearing a back brace, and she had a brace on each of her legs. So she dedicated each one to a particular person in the Holy Trinity. Mother Angelica attributed all of her accomplishments to the foundation of pain that God had built in her life. Sometimes it takes more than prayer, it takes great suffering. In addition to the physical pain and the emotional pain of her childhood, Mother Angelica suffered the pain of a type of persecution within the church. Her whole idea was to provide her audience with orthodox teaching that reveals the beauty of the Catholic Church. This set her at odds with factions that were advocating for reform. Whether the issue was gender-inclusive language in the catechism, the ordination of women, relaxing teaching on sexual morality, or bishops who seemed to be downplaying the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, Mother stood in opposition to many. She did not want to give those ideas and the people who promoted them a platform on her network. In March of 2000, Mother Angelica stepped down as CEO of EWTN, making it clear that it was and would continue to be an autonomous lay-run civil entity, and thus keeping it out of the hands of the liberal Catholic media establishment. She trusted her friends and her colleagues who had been supporting her for so many years to take the network into the future. For Angelica, money wasn't a worry, and it didn't come down to power or prestige. Her mission was to introduce souls like Paul Darrow to the truth and beauty of Christ and his church. Our kaleidoscope moving around again, and our next saint is going to be Saint Teresa of Calcutta, Mother Teresa. No talk on 20th century saints would be complete without Mother Teresa. The defining moment for this saint happened on a train to Darjeeling. She was 36 years old, and for half of her life, she'd been a teacher at a girls' convent school in Calcutta. On that train trip, seeing the throngs of poor people, she had an experience that changed her life. She felt Jesus calling her to serve him in the poor, to recognize each poor person as Jesus in his distressing disguise. This was Mother Teresa's call within a call. In August of 1948, she removed her habit and she put on a sari, white, edged with blue stripes. She left her beloved convent and set out into the streets of Calcutta. Others had ministered to the poor from inside the walls of churches, schools, and hospitals, but she went out to live amongst the poor as they lived. Her first task was to gather up those close to death and provide a loving place where they could spend their last moments in dignity. She followed by building an orphanage, a convalescent facility, a home for disabled adolescents, a hospice for lepers. She began replicating her efforts throughout India and then throughout the world. Mother Teresa was like a magnet. Yes, she drew the poor to her in droves, but she also drew the good out of people. Like Dorothy, her intention was to influence by example. People saw what she was doing and they wanted to help. It seemed like her work was just as much to help the world as it was to help the poor. She saw poverty not just as a material condition, but as a spiritual condition. The poor suffered from a lack of love, and the rich suffered from a kind of spiritual corrosion. Like Dorothy Day, Edith Stein, St. Pope John Paul II, and Mother Angelica, Mother Teresa was a personalist. She did not want her order to have anything to do with bureaucracy, budgets, or long-range plans. She dealt with the person and the problem in front of her. She had a simple trust in God to provide. Anita Figueiredo had a story about a special chalice that she and her husband Bill had with them when they were visiting the Missionaries of Charity compound in Calcutta. Bill had really meant to take this chalice to a priest friend of his in Japan, but by way of explaining the box on his lap, he said to Mother Teresa, "Need a chalice?" Her response was immediate, and she said, "Oh, good, you brought it. Father Andrew is coming tomorrow to say Mass here for the first time, and I asked God to bring him a chalice." So she counted on God through the goodness of others to bring rice or streptomycin, whatever it was the poor needed. She seemed to have an extraordinary personal connection to God, and yet after she died, we discover that she suffered for years from a lack of consolation in prayer. She couldn't feel the presence of God, but she kept doing what she was doing, always faithful, never worrying about success. In 1979, she won the Nobel Peace Prize. In 1985, when she addressed the United Nations, Javier Perez de Cuellar introduced her as the most powerful woman in the world. That morning, she had cleaned all the toilets in the Missionaries of Charity house in New York City. In Oslo, at the UN, and at the National Prayer Breakfast in '94, Mother Teresa challenged everyone to take care of the poor. She also challenged everyone to stand up for life. Rather than seeing contraception and abortion as solutions to poverty, she saw the attitude they engender as toxic, both to the poor and to the wealthy societies. Any country that accepts abortion is not teaching its people to love one another, but to use any violence to get what they want. Mother Teresa was such a phenomenon. Everyone knows about her heroic love for the poor. But she urges us to be just like her. We can all find someone who needs love and attention. The work is for everyone. Start at home. Here are the women that we're celebrating this evening in the chronological order of their birthdays. When we get to know their stories, we can see the components God placed in each of their lives. We can see the graces they were given and how they responded. We can see many common threads that weave them together into the body of Christ. So after attending our series, I hope you can see how the feminine genius of the Catholic Church surfaces in women everywhere and throughout time. Let's recognize it, celebrate it, and pour it forth into a culture that badly needs to be bathed in this reality. If anybody has any questions, we can unmute the microphones and you'll have to say. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Marty. This is Diana. What a comprehensive and terrific presentation. Really well done. The grand design of God's plan for each of these 6 ladies and all of those that the feminine genius of their faith and actions touched is just phenomenal. So thank you so much for that. We don't really have any questions at this moment in the chat.
Okay.
But I have a question for you. I'm curious, of the 6 kaleidoscopic women that you shared with us tonight, which one of them do you think kind of had the greatest impact on you and what you've been going through to prepare for this presentation?
Oh man, I loved all of them. Every time I would move to the new one, I would say to myself, oh, this one's going to be quick. I'm not going to be spending too much time on her. And then it would be, you know, just completely engrossed. But I mean, there were a few things that stood out to me. One thing is, I mean, I love the thinking of Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross and how that is coming up again in John Paul II's theology of the body. I love that and how relevant it is to our time. And I also love, like, there's a thread of the spirituality and the locutions and the visions and all of this stuff that, you know, I, as a software engineer, kind of like think maybe that's a little bit over the top. But learning about the stories of these women, it really makes you want to open yourself up to that aspect. And I have a little extra thing I could tell you about St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. Okay, so recently Barry and I saw a movie. It was called A Hidden Life. And it was the story of Franz Jägerstätter, who was a conscientious objector. It wasn't even so much that he didn't want to fight in the war in World War II, but he would not sign a thing that said he gave allegiance to Hitler. Okay, so he was murdered. I mean, he was guillotined for that. I'm sorry if I spoiled the movie for you. But the thing that really stood out to me was in looking at, I don't know if it was the special features on the disc, but he had a vision of people in cattle cars before he knew that was happening, you know, and he was killed on August 9th, the year after Teresa Benedicta of the Cross was gassed at Auschwitz. So, you know, that is just, I mean, it just puts me in a frame of thinking that perhaps all of this vision type of stuff, there's something to it.
Absolutely.
That was one thing. And another thing that was really entertaining to read about was Raymond Arroyo's biography of Mother Angelica. I mean, it was so funny because she actually had a blueprint class when she was in high school. And so when she was working at the convent, she joined the convent, and the convent that they were given was this falling apart place. So they had contractors coming in. And so Angelica, because she knew about blueprints, she managed the construction. She was a general contractor. And all these people loved her. These guys working for her, the other nuns called them the Tonys because they were all Italian and they all loved Angelica. And so just example, they were building like a grotto on the convent grounds, and Angelica goes to the head of the mafia in that area, and she says, I want you guys to pay for this. And so the guy goes, all right, how much money do you want? I'll write a check. And Angelica says, no, I don't want a check from you. I want a check from each of your guys. So they rounded up all these checks, all this money to pay for this grotto. And Angelica put a note with a prayer for each of the men back behind the stones in that grotto. So that kind of, just really interesting, sweet things that there's never enough time to tell about all of it. But, and of course, Dr. Anita Figueiredo, I mean, I always thought I had to stay home and take care of my kids, but who knew, just get some daycare and go for it. Choices, So yeah, they were all special. Each and every one of these women, just amazing.
You can tell by
Absolutely.
that they are special.
Yeah, I really enjoyed researching it. It was a lot of work though.
Well, you
Yes,
had
we can
so
tell.
much information for us. It was wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I packed a lot in.
Honestly, all the 3 presentations have been incredible. This last one felt for me a bit more tangible because I'm not all the way high up to Mary's level, and I'm not a saint. I'm just this little person trying to do just what I can. And we've got pictures of these people, and they actually have makeup, and there's color. I don't know, like the entire time I had tears right here in my eyes, just looking at this going, what would my story look like? Like right, Diana Martini knows me well. If she were asked to write my story, what would it look like? Marty knows me, I'm a software engineer too. What would that look like? Where do I fit in here? I think that's what I want to do tonight, is I want to see, like seriously, you inspired something huge. Thank you. Big fan, thank you. Yeah, I think there's hope for all of us.
There is. There's hope for all of us. We all have our stories.
We all have our stories. And the good thing is we've got plenty of suffering. I was going through my suffering checklist. So yeah,
Yes.
we're on the right track.
Yeah.
The thing that I appreciated about all of these women that you were talking about, and then you connected other people in their lives, is like everyone that you talked about was connected to each other. They'd met each other, they were influenced by each other.
They make a web.
Which then made me think about, how we're all part of the same body, and that what happens to one of us matters to someone else. And then when we talk about how a sin that you commit could in your mind be just, hey, it was just me.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't really know how it ripples. But when you talked about all of these women who, look at the span of their life cycles, they all knew each other and they were all connected, either directly or through people that they knew. And so it just brings home the fact that we're all related, and everything we do actually matters to someone. And so your point about, I think one of the ladies that you also talked about is like, just love someone.
Mhm.
Do it in a big way, because then it just ripples and it matters to everyone.
Yeah.
Not
And even
alone. We're not alone.
not just the sin, but even actually like not taking advantage of the graces.
Mhm.
That we have graces to be great, to be spectacular. And, sometimes I think I miss out on some of those.
I'm just blown away by the common sort of theme or denominator, which is this unbelievable confidence. You talk about the girl who says, I'm not going to come to this Ivy League school because you insulted my high school, or the little one who's convinced she's gonna be a doctor,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, it's so amazing. And then, no business plan to have a company that can reach 293 million people.
Right.
It's like, who wouldn't
Angelica said that would be limiting God, to put together a budget.
it's just like the level of trust and confidence. Just one little piece of it.
Yeah.
Piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's definitely a crazy.
I feel like your presentation was wonderful, very informative, very inspiring. And also the women are great role models, I see, who actually, met their life challenges in many different ways.
Right.
Real go-getters too. I actually met Dr. Figueredo
Mhm.
many years ago when I had my firstborn. I was at Scripps La Jolla, and my doctor at the time was Dr. Michael Kilty, who was well known in the Catholic community. He was an OBGYN. And one time he couldn't see me, so I had to go to her office. And that's how I just met her through just that one visit. And little did I know who she really was. I knew she was well known in the Catholic community, but little did I know all the other things. Thank you for your
Yeah.
presentation.
You're welcome.
Great.
Hey,
Okay.
Marty, there's one other comment that was written in from Melissa Sanchez. She said, fabulous presentation, Marty. Thank you for the very comprehensive kaleidoscope of women of faith. So just so you're
Right.
aware.
All right. Thank you, Melissa. Okay. So moving on, we actually have like a follow-up. If anybody wants to, they can go on to the Mighty Network and maybe reflect on the question of who do you know that has the extraordinary, beautiful components of a saint.
Mm.
So that's it for me. And thank you all for being here and for listening and for participating. Really appreciate it. And
Can I
Thank
answer that
you so
question
much.
before we go?
oh, Barry has something to say.
Yeah,
Am I going to click Dick River again? Is that it?
no. I would say that anybody that has to live with me would have the extraordinary components of a saint. Thank you,
Amen.
Martha.
Amen.
I agree. I actually agree with you on that.
And there's a piece of pie waiting for you.
Oh, I'm happy.
That's your reward.
Yeah. It's saving me a slice.
Yeah.
All right. Dessert.
Wonderful. And if you present it again, I'll attend. It's really fantastic. All of these wonderful informational presentations.
I'm kind of upset I couldn't connect the first time, and then the second time I totally forgot. And I go, I've got to make it the third time.
They're recorded,
So I'm
Zadie.
glad.
They're recorded, Zadie. You can go online. OLMC
Okay.
has them online. So go and watch them there.
Got
You got
it.
it.
It's on the Adult Faith Formation website. So on the
Okay,
Adult Faith Formation, and I think you can see each of them.
great. Thank you.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, it is. They go back. The fathers of the church and
Yeah.
a bunch of different stuff on there. That's really good.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks,
Good
Marty.
night.
Good job.
Yay.
What is your-
Yeah, we can do our